Hey there, me again. In today's video, we're going to be talking about a hotly debated topic in the photography world, and that is the comparison between SLR cameras and rangefinder cameras, and what style camera might be right for you. So before we get started, I just want to say a lot of the points that I'm going to be making are kind of generalizations about these cameras, and I'm sure there are plenty of outliers out there, and if you know of any cameras that don't quite fit the mold in terms of the things I'm talking about, definitely leave them in the comments below, because I'm sure we would all love to hear about and learn about them. Also, I shoot a lot of film on this channel, so a lot of my points are going to be focused around the use of film photography. A lot of these points, if not all the points, also apply to digital cameras, but just know I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of a film shooter. So they're going to make the most sense in terms of talking about really old cameras and ancient film technology. So let's get right into it and start comparing SLRs to rangefinders. So when people compare and contrast rangefinders and SLRs, I think usually the first thing that comes up is the size and weight of the different camera systems. A lot of people try and say that rangefinders are so much smaller and so much more compact than SLRs, but that's really not the case. If you look at a rangefinder and an SLR side by side, especially if you're looking at the same brand, they're going to look almost identical other than the little hump on top of the SLR for the prism and the mirror. The bodies themselves are typically the same size if you're not accounting for that little hump on top of the SLR. I will say though, the difference in size and weight manifests itself a little bit more when you look at the lenses. Rangefinder lenses are typically much smaller than their SLR equivalents, and just to illustrate that point, here's a look at my Jupiter 12, which is a 35mm f2.8 lens for my rangefinder, next to a 35mm 2.8 SLR lens. And you can see one is obviously much bigger than the other. So that is really where size and weight comes into play when you're looking at these two different camera systems. So the main difference, I think, between SLRs and rangefinders is the method of framing, composing, and focusing your shots. I think on paper, SLRs seem to have a lot of advantages when it comes to framing and focusing. For one, you're looking through a mirror, which is showing you an exact view through the lens, so you don't have to have any guesswork when it comes to what's going to show up in your final image. You can also preview the depth of field with SLRs so that you can see how much of the scene is going to be in focus. That can't be done with rangefinders, as you are just looking through a viewfinder window on the side of the camera. SLRs can also focus much closer than rangefinders typically. Usually with rangefinders you're limited to a close focus distance of 1 meter or maybe just a little bit under 1 meter depending on the lens mount and the manufacturer. With SLRs you have the advantage of being able to use macro lenses which can focus super close, so that is a huge advantage. Rangefinders have a much different way of focusing and framing your image, and that is by looking through a little viewfinder window on the side of the camera. Focusing is done with a rangefinder patch in the middle of the viewfinder. All you have to do is line up the ghost image with the actual image and you're in focus. I find this more intuitive to use than microprism focusing screens that are in a lot of SLRs. The focus throw on rangefinder lenses is much shorter than with most SLR lenses. This makes focusing much faster and almost instant when you get comfortable with zone focusing. When I was thinking about buying my first rangefinder camera, looking through a little viewfinder on the side was kind of a scary concept or a bit of a worry for me because I wasn't going to be getting exactly what I was seeing through the viewfinder. But when you think about it, it's not all that much of a worry. You can't focus closer than 1 meter with this camera, so any parallax error that you're going to encounter isn't going to be that much, and it's not going to be that big of a deal in most situations. Also, on top of that, this specific camera features parallax correction, so as you focus and change the focus distance, the frame lines move to keep the image that you're going to see in the final image lined up with what you're seeing in the viewfinder. Another advantage that a lot of rangefinder cameras have with this little viewfinder on the side is that you can see outside of the image that you're looking at. You can keep your eye up to the camera and see things that are walking into the frame, which is helpful for composing and kind of predicting what's going to happen in the photos you're going to take. Another thing I really enjoy about focusing and framing with a rangefinder is the fact that it's really easy to do at night. So as long as you have a bright enough rangefinder patch, you can focus very easily because you're just lining up a ghost image to the real image, and the viewfinder window isn't going to be any darker than what you're seeing in real life. So framing and composing is a breeze when you're looking through this little window in the dark. Another thing we should talk about when comparing and contrasting rangefinders and SLRs is lens selection. When it comes to versatility and the amount of options you have, SLRs definitely win the battle as they have much longer lens options to choose from. You can get everything from super wide-angle lenses all the way to 1,000mm lenses if you really want, depending on the camera system and lens mount. Rangefinders typically will only go up to about 135mm because after that it becomes difficult to create a focusing system for a rangefinder that will work well with really long lenses. So let's talk about modularity really quick. And this is a category that I think SLRs kind of edge out rangefinders just a little bit. Now this particular camera isn't super modular, but cameras like the Nikon F2, the Canon F1 are pretty modular, as you can change out the viewfinders, you can change out the focusing screens. They even have auto winders and different film backs that can hold larger rolls of film so that you can shoot for longer. So SLRs do have a little bit more modularity than rangefinders. Rangefinders have some, depending on what the manufacturer is that you're looking at, but any modular features typically are really expensive. Now, I'm thinking about things like the Leicavit for Leica cameras. It's a very expensive piece, and rangefinders are just a much more simple camera design. So now let's talk about camera shake. So with SLRs, obviously you have a mirror that is slapping up and down, and with a rangefinder, you just have a shutter curtain, or maybe you have a leaf shutter in your lens if it's a non-interchangeable lens rangefinder. So typically with rangefinders, it's a lot easier to get away with slower shutter speeds handheld than an SLR. Although it is worth mentioning that a lot of SLRs have mirror lockup. So that's very useful, but typically you're going to be using that when you're using a tripod. Now let's talk about the final point, and that is price. So with both of these styles of cameras, there is a camera for pretty much every budget out there. So no need to worry if you're on a budget, you can find either of these styles of cameras and you're not going to break the bank. If you're looking at rangefinders, the price does typically go up a lot more quickly than it does with SLRs. So when you start to look at rangefinder cameras that have interchangeable lenses, they're typically much more expensive than a fixed lens rangefinder just because they're a little bit more versatile and people like them a little bit more. The premium rangefinder cameras of the day, like Leicas and Contax cameras, are very, very expensive, and you're going to pay well over $1,000 for a camera when you're looking at those. But there are some interchangeable lens options, like this Canon P, and many of the options from Nikon are a fraction of the price, and you can get a very versatile camera for that cost. So I think when I'm looking at this camera, I think I bought this as well as 3 lenses, all different focal lengths, one of which being an older Leica lens, all for $300 total. So there's definitely some versatile options out there that won't break the bank. When SLRs came on the market, they quickly took over and became the dominant style of camera, and because of that, there's tons of SLRs out there that you can choose from, so finding a fully featured camera on the cheap is not that difficult. So where do each of these camera styles shine? Well, I think rangefinders shine a little bit more for lifestyle and everyday sorts of photography, as well as faster-paced things like street photography. The fact that rangefinders, when you consider the size of their lenses, are a little bit more compact, maybe a little bit lighter and easy to carry around with you, lend themselves to everyday photography and having them with you at all times. Also, the little advantages like the shorter focus throws of most rangefinder lenses as well as the ability to see outside of your frame, make street photography and faster paced things much easier. If you're looking for a more versatile camera with more lens options and maybe a little bit more modularity, I think an SLR is definitely the way to go. If you want to do macro photography, if you want to do things like shoot nature with super long lenses, maybe shoot sports with really long lenses, an SLR is going to be much better than a rangefinder. That being said, you can use any of these types of cameras for whatever you want. Just one or the other might make specific tasks a little bit easier. So that is about it for this video. I hope you learned something. I hope I brought up some points that you didn't really think about when you're thinking about the difference between SLRs and rangefinders. Let me know down in the comments what you shoot with. What camera are you using? And what style of camera do you prefer and why? I'd love to hear about it, and I'm sure everybody in the comments would love to hear about it as well. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye now.